welcome to Jot Notes, a podcast where we dive into the world of books and the lives of authors. My name is Jenna Green, and I'm a YA fantasy author of the Imagine series and the Reborn Mark series. Joining us is co-host and producer of the show, Miranda O, and she is a contemporary chick lit author of the Chin Up, Tits Out series. Miranda, as always, has the privilege and honor of introducing our guests for today. Guests. I didn't say guest. I didn't mess up. We have, for the price of one, two guests. So I'm going to throw it over to her, and she's going to explain our two guests for today. Hi, Miranda.
Hello. I'm super thrilled to introduce our guests today. We have a dynamic duo. We have a writer and we have an illustrator, and apparently I have my dog in the background who just wanted to say hello. So without further ado, I'm going to let them introduce themselves before we dive into some questions and get to know these two beautiful creators. So hi, Bruce, and hi, Julia. It's so lovely to have you. Bruce, I'm going to start with you just because, we've met before, and I would love to have a little background of who you are, what you do, where you come from.
Okay. I am a history professor at Citrus College. I've been here since 1998. I've been teaching history for 30 years, so I've been doing it for a while. But I'm also a writer and a playwright, and I create comic books. I write comic books as well, so that's kind of why we're here today. But I also produced plays online, and we talked about that last time. And I'm the son of immigrants from Norway who came to America in 1948 after World War II. They lived under Nazi occupation, so you might, as you might imagine, I grew up with a lot of interesting stories about that. They lived right through the worst part of World War II. My dad was in a labor camp, and so it was terrible. So I grew up with all that. I became a history professor. I served in the Army for 6 years as a jail guard and a helicopter pilot. I worked as a defense contractor, and I've done a little bit of everything. And what I really love to do is teach and write. So here I am.
That is a beautiful introduction, and there is so much I want to unpack in your previous careers and kind of dive into that. But before we do that, Julia, I would love for you to share a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and what you do.
Okay, so I'm an artist that lives in Poland, and I'm currently an art student. I study digital art. And I guess I can say that I'm a comic illustrator, even though Dr. Jekyll is actually my first ever project like that. But I'm really hopeful to working like that more in the future. And I've always loved drawing, and I've always loved the comics. These two things are pretty much most of my life. I draw or read comics whenever I can, and yeah, I guess that's about myself.
Thank you. That's fantastic. I have some family that is Polish. I'm not Polish. I'm Ukrainian. But my cousin married into a Polish family, and I swear to you, they are the nicest, kindest people ever. And we kind of like the same types of food when it comes to Ukrainian food. So, sister, I feel you, and I'm so thrilled to have you on our podcast. Now, first things first, I want to know, how did you two partner up? How did you become this dynamic duo and create this piece of art together?
I can start that, and then I'll let Julia add to it. I have published two other comic books, Snarc 1 and Snarc 2, and it was a lifelong dream. In fact, Snarc 1 was 37 years in the making, so it's a good story for people not giving up on their dreams. I mean, I always wanted to publish a comic book and write a comic book, which I did finally. And then I had Gary Dumm, who's been illustrating comics since the 70s as my artist, and he was not available for doing Dr. Jekyll, Alien Hunter, which was my new comic idea. And so I said, okay, I'm going to have to find another artist because I want to keep going, publishing at least one comic a year. And I just happened to be on Instagram and, well, I guess Snarc, I'm on as Snarc, the Snarc comic on Instagram. And somehow, just miraculously, Julia's artwork came up randomly on Instagram. And I saw it and I instantly thought, not only is she a tremendous artist, but it fits the character better because Dr. Jekyll, Alien Hunter, is a lead female character, and Julia is a female artist. And I thought that's a good combination. I want that energy in the comic. And as you guys probably know, there's not a whole lot of female artists in comics, and there aren't too many female lead characters that aren't superheroes. So, and our character is not a superhero. So I just saw her art. I fell in love with it. It's so unique. And she'll tell you more about it, but that's kind of how we met. And then we started talking, and I was excited about her art. She was excited about the project, and I'll let her take it from there.
Okay, so I've always liked comics, and I was always thinking about illustrating them for a living one day, and I started posting my art online. It mostly, ironically, wasn't comics that I posted, but I guess that didn't matter because one day Bruce reached out to me and he said that he really likes what I'm doing, and he offered me to illustrate his new comic. And I was at first really surprised because I wasn't expecting to get an offer like that just out of posting my art online, but I was also really happy because I've always liked comics and was always thinking about illustrating them one day. So yeah, I agreed to talk to Bruce more, and eventually I agreed to illustrate for him.
It's an interesting thing. So just last spring, I had a picture book published, and I write YA novels. So other than the cover illustration, which I just trust the artist, go with it, you know what you're doing. I had to be in this similar position as Bruce, where you have to find someone to illustrate, and where the illustrations have as much or possibly more meaning than the story itself, adding to it, elaborating with it, connecting to it. And there was a lot of, not pressure, but a little bit of anxiety. I wanted to make sure, like, first it was like, I get to pick the artist, and then it was, I get to pick the artist, and trying to match that vision, right? There has to be a meshing, and they have to understand what the author's trying to get across, but also try and understand that other medium, that there are things that an artist can do and can't do. And so it's really an interesting dynamic. So can't wait to just hear more as we go through the next few minutes about how you two work together.
Which, Jenna, you couldn't have segued into my next question better for me. So thank you very much. I'm so curious kind of how you two, I don't want to say divvied up the work, but how did you make this partnership work? Bruce, you're in North America. Julia, you're over in Europe. That's just, a little hop, a skip, and a jump away. It's not like you could meet at a Starbucks and, powwow some stuff out. So how did that look like for you guys?
Well, it's all mostly email, but we did have an initial Skype meeting where we got to know each other a little bit. And she got a feel for what, more about the character and who I was. And we had we did a very simple type of contract because, that's always safe to do that when we've never met each other, in real life. And we're separated by so much space, so. So we started that way. But as far as the collaboration goes, I'm a frustrated comic book artist. But I have really high standards, so I don't want to publish my art. So well, with Snarc, it started as a comic book, as a comic strip in the student newspaper at Montana Tech. I was an engineering student back in 1982, if you can believe that. And that's how the character started. But I'm not happy with my art, so I need to find professional artists. And Julia just fit really well. And I haven't shared this before, but when she first saw Gary Dumm actually did an initial sketch for what it would look like, the first story in Dr. Jekyll, and I gave that to Julia. And one of the first things she said, "Do you want me to illustrate it in his style?" And I said, "Absolutely not. I want you to do it in your style." I don't know if you remember that, Julia, but that was one of the first things we talked about, right? And so no, I wanted her style. I wanted to be her energy, and she has, I mean, just taken over the character. I mean, yeah, I wrote the storyboards, or as we call them, mock-ups, and gave them to her, but she took it from there. So and made the character her own, and it's very much, she's put so much of herself into the character, and that's exactly what I wanted. And it is, like you said, a meshing. You can't really see where my contribution stopped and hers entered, because it's kind of intermeshed, because she had suggestions on the character and how it should be portrayed. And then of course she's even though she's very young, I mean, she just turned 20 years old, she has an expertise level that's at way higher. And sequential art is not easy. I mean, panels in a comic book, you can't be redundant. You have to tell the story without being redundant to the what's the narrative. And she has that. And I even showed it to Gary, some of her early panel work, and Gary was blown away with her expertise at such a young age. So and I've said this before, and I know maybe she gets tired of hearing it, but I'm lucky that I got her now, because I think 10 years from now, I'm not going to be able to afford her. She's going to be in high demand. So I hope she still wants to work with me, but I would understand if she wants to move on. So that's fine. But hopefully we'll get a couple of issues out before she gets the big offers. So
that is absolutely fantastic. To be praised by you would be an absolute honor, Bruce. So I'm so happy that it ended up being a positive relationship, a positive connection. Julia, I know that you said that you were not expecting something like this to come out of, just by posting your art on social media. Has doing this not only opened up your eyes to a world that you may or may not have seen yourself in totally, and has it opened up opportunity for new business for you as well?
Yes, I think definitely. Well, I was seeing myself as a comic illustrator, but I definitely wasn't expecting it to happen so fast. I still think I'm gonna have some other jobs in the future besides comics, but I still was expecting to. I was expecting it to be a much longer way before I'm able to, well, work as a comic illustrator, especially because the comic industry in Poland isn't as strong as in some other countries. And I hope it opened some opportunities for me for other projects like that. And I know that I'm going to illustrate Dr. Jekyll Part 2. Bruce already talked about it with me, and I hope he won't change his plans about me illustrating that. And yeah, I hope for other projects or for other comic writers in the future, and maybe this comic that I worked on will well, bring me some opportunities like that. And I certainly learned a lot during this project about how how this works, how what it's really like to illustrate a comic for, well, someone else's story, what it's like to work with an author. And yeah, I'm definitely a better artist after this project.
I can see the connection between illustrator and author in when you're trying to find work, right? Like if you want to be published, they're like, awesome, where have you been published? We'll only publish you if you already have a resume, right? Well, I'm trying to get published. I can't get published until I have proof that I've been published. And when I was looking at, illustrators for my picture book, it's like they have to have a portfolio. This is a portfolio of my work. Now, an illustrator, an artist can show things they've done, but it's the same thing. Well, who have you drawn for? What have you been paid for? Right? We're not going to hire you until we know. It's like, how do you get job experience without a job? You need a job experience to get the job, to get experience, right? And so authors, illustrators, we get caught in that cycle, and until someone gives us that first shot, that first chance, you're kind of in that stuck position. But now, Julia, you have something for your resume, your portfolio, to say, I have done this, right? And then as more opportunities come, you have that backlog. So I can see definitely this getting you some more opportunities and more connections, and having something in your toolbox, in your tool bag, saying, this is what I've accomplished. And then you have, Bruce there as a reference, and he'll say, yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. Having somebody like Bruce with his history and success and credentials, it's like the best person to have on a reference list moving forward, and to get that right off the hop is it just speaks to how talented you really are. And we haven't spent much time looking into this or getting to know you, but it definitely, just by the way Bruce speaks about you, and kind of how this connection is gone, we can definitely tell that you are one talented individual, and can't wait to see what comes next down the pipeline for you, Julia.
Thank you. And I also wanted to say that I think I'm very lucky that Bruce reached out to me like this, and that he offered me to work for him, because, like you said, well, usually people want someone that already has an experience, and I'm lucky that I got that first job, this early.
Yeah, and I want to say that, I mentioned earlier that Gary Dumm, who illustrated Snarc 1 and Snarc 2, he has more than 50 years in the comic industry as a professional illustrator. And he worked on American Splendor with Harvey Pekar, which became a movie in 2003. And anyway, so he's so well known in the community. And when I showed him, he told me he couldn't do Dr. Jekyll. When I showed him Julia's art, like I said, he was blown away. And that is really, really high praise when you're talking about a guy that everybody in the comic art community knows. And he might not be a household name like Robert Crumb or some of these other Neil Adams or something, but in the comic community, but people who are in the know Gary. He's a artist's artist, and so that's really high praise for Julia. And I'm glad that she agreed to do not Snarc, but Dr. Jekyll #2, which I'm giving her storyboards already. So we just keep moving. And her pace is really good. It fits my pace. If you work at Marvel or DC, they put out issues every month or two, and that's a really fast pace. I mean, I could probably write something that fast, but I don't want to. I like just publishing 1 or 2 comics a year, and so our pace fits. My schedule, her schedule. Even though she's going to school full time and doing this gig. And she spends, I don't know exactly how much time, but she spends a lot of effort and work and time on each story. that we do in the. It's actually a graphic novel rather than a comic, but yeah. So it's about 67 pages or so, I think. This book.
That's a big undertaking, a heavy load. That's
Yeah,
exciting.
we got it done. How long did it take, Julia? You started in October or September, or no?
Yeah, something like that. But I think that by September I already had all the sketches for the
Yeah.
pages, and in September I started to just finalize them.
Yeah. And I do want to mention the third person that's not here, our editor, George, and you guys know the importance of editors, George Varangos, who is a real comics. He would appreciate me calling him this, even though it sounds like an insult. He's a real comics fanboy. So he loves comic book art, and he just loved working with Gary Dumm, on the Snarc series, and he's loved working with Julia. And he also, if he was there, he'd be singing her praises too. Um, but he's an instrumental part, because every time Julia sends a story, I run it by George, and we all make comments and make it as good as we can make it. So it's a three-part team,
I think
three-person team.
I think our audience has definitely been drawn into this idea of author, illustrator, editor, and the collaboration. But I think they're chomping at the bit a little bit to find out more about the story itself. I mean, the title catches you. So you got Dr. Jekyll, right? And that definitely references Jekyll and Hyde, or, brings that connotation. But then Alien Hunter. So you've got a lot of mixture in that. So
Yeah.
I think I'd like to know a little bit more about what the story is. You've mentioned a little bit about what makes the character unique, but what is that exactly is going on in this story?
Yeah, so she is an anthropology professor. Henna Jekyll is her name. Henna Jekyll, Dr. Henna Jekyll. She's an anthropology professor at Cleveland State University. She's following in her father's footsteps, who was also an anthropology professor. And he got into a little hot water because he started studying, kind of moved into ancient aliens, looking into that. And then he was kind of driven out of the university before he wanted to be, retired. And then Hannah Jekyll, his daughter, then comes into Cleveland State, kind of almost goes into his office, and much to the the people that are there, takes up her father's research, and they get upset with her, saying, hey, you don't want to go down that path like your father did. And she pushes back. She's a very strong-willed character, and pushes back and says, no, this is my father's work. I'm going to honor him. And she has like this whole, what her dad called an alien holy grail research book that she has, that she follows and looks for clues. And her mother, she was an only child. Her mother and father are both passed away. Her mother is from Jamaica, and her dad is of European extraction. So she's a biracial person. And she goes on all these adventures around the world, all these paranormal hotspots, UFO hotspots, Area 51, one of the stories in there. So, and she has these amazing discoveries and along the way. And what has happened is that, I've written 4 paranormal books based on my own personal experiences. So I have a very deep well to draw from for this character. So I happen to be a professor too, although not a anthropology professor. But there's stuff. It's a fictional story, but there is a lot of good stuff in there that's actual experiences, not just me, but others as well. And I forgot to mention, she has a cat that helps her. Her cat, also with a literary reference. His name is Dr. Stanley Livingston, but she calls him Stanley. And also for you guys and your listeners, a little Easter egg. If you take an anagram of Henna Jekyll, it's J. Allen Hynek, who is the Project Blue Book scientist. He's passed away now, but he was the original Project Blue Book scientist. So that's kind of a fun little thing. There's other Easter eggs in there too some that Julia did too, some visual stuff. But that's kind of a cool one. And as you guys know, and your listeners know, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Robert Louis Stevenson, great classic book. It's impacted so many authors and people and movies and stuff that that kind of thing. But the in that book, there were not very many female characters, and all of them were kind of like victims. So in this case, Henna Jekyll is not a victim. She's not a superhero, but she is the hero of the story. She's a very strong female character, and that's I really had to write from that perspective. Beginning of the book of the graphic novel, I thanked all the women in my life because I had to draw on all of that female energy to write it. And then of course Julia just illustrated it beautifully. So
it's that idea of not a superhero, but a protagonist, right? This is a person that you're rooting for. This is a person that has extraordinary abilities, not superhuman abilities, but intelligence, perception, empathy, whatever they are. What would you say are her, other than, just boldness or things like that? What are her primary characteristics?
Well, she's extremely intelligent and intuitive. She's a natural intuitive, and which most people are who have these experiences, because it's unless the old saying is that with experience comes belief, and with belief comes experience. So it opens up doors. Each time you go through a new door, and then something miraculous happens, you go through another door, and it expands your perspective on these anomalous events, these things that are so strange, high strangeness, I guess they call it. So that's part of her journey. And she meets some very interesting characters along the way. Some of her, one of George's favorite characters in the story is Dr. Wong, who was an old colleague of of Henna's father. And he had some clues to give her. So it's kind of like it's not a mystery, but in a way it's kind of a mystery because she's finding these clues about what's really going on with UFOs and aliens, and she even gets into the ufology community, and we kind of poke fun a little bit at that, where there's a lot of charlatans, and which I'm very familiar with the the ufology community. There's a lot of charlatans and people like that, and she gets involved with a Hollywood agent at one point, and but she's dedicated to her students, and she also volunteers at the Y. She helps kids who have recently, foster kids that have been recently emancipated. Which you guys know that's I see that at the college where I teach. Those kids have a lot of challenges ahead of them. They just get kind of dumped out from the system. And they're on their own. They don't have family. They got usually nobody. And so Henna's a really wonderful person. I really like her. It's fun to like. It's necessary to like your characters, even your evil characters. You have to like them in some way. And but I really like her character. It was really fun to write, and it's going to keep going for quite a while. So so it's a different vibe than the Snarc, which is a little bit more comedic. Although there is funny stuff in Dr. Jekyll too, but it's kind of a action adventure and kind of a little bit more cerebral, perhaps.
I like it. Very interesting. Lots of different layers: action, adventure, and anthropology, right? The study of cultures, and so it seems like there's a lot of things in it that lots of people could like, but also a lot of doors open for the sequel. Is it sequel or sequels?
I don't see an end to it, so I'll keep writing as long as, I can. And as long as Julia wants to work with me, I hope she, who knows? We don't have it's not like a limited series or anything. I don't have an end point yet. And I don't really know where it's going. And I think you guys know what I mean with that, because the characters are taking over right now. And once you really get into it and you establish the character, I mean, Julia visually established it. I established it in writing, and now we've meshed it into something that's taken on a life of its own. And Henna is now telling me where she's going to go. So I'm
Was it
just as excited as anybody else about
was it cool to see, like, I just thought of this, and this is one of the tangents that we go off of. Like, I love reading a book and then watching a movie on it, especially something that in and around the fantasy, because you're making
Mhm.
up that world, right? And then trying to visualize or trying to compare, this is what my brain saw when I read the book to whatever was created on film. And so, like, this, Bruce, when you were able to see your main characters actually being drawn and interpreted
Mhm.
out by somebody, one that you have never met before, but another empowering female lead, like, how did that make you feel? Like, to me, I feel like I would just probably jump and squeal and maybe cry happy tears.
It is no, it is very, very exciting, and I'm just following along. I mean, I have some ideas that some of the I always, I'm also a playwright, so I have that kind of way of structuring the story. They're like, all the stories are stories within stories, so it's like 3 or 4, sometimes 5 pages, and they each are separately titled, so they don't necessarily stand alone, but they have a unique kind of quality to them, and kind of like that's how I wrote play. When I write a play, I don't just say scene 1, scene 2. I have a name for each scene, which I think is kind of important because it keeps a theme going, and it captures a lot about what's going on, and it keeps me more focused too. So that's what we did in this comic, which is not traditional at all. When you look at a regular comic book, a story in a comic book, usually about 26 pages, it'll be straight through, and this is like every 3 or 4 or 5 pages, we have a new title for that next chapter, or that next scene, or that next story, and that's just the way it came out. That's the way I write, and I think it's a little bit theatrical, but that's just the style that I like, and it seems to, and it fits really well. If you guys, you probably read manga, and how that Japanese style comic is so popular throughout the world, and that's influenced Julia too. And her artwork is, she has, it's not manga, but it's obviously inspired by manga, and so it's a mixture of so many different things, of my American perspective, her perspective of being in Europe, and then the Japanese perspective on the illustration, which is also there. And I forgot to say this, but Henna is really pretty much a down to earth person too. Even though she's exploring aliens, she is very down to earth, and she's focused on what she's doing, and a very real person. And yeah, it's just it's so much fun, and and I also forgot to mention, it's all ages too. So everything I write, all my comic books are all ages, so from little kids to older kids. Older people can be excited about it.
We're all kids at heart. I'm just
Yeah.
a couple decades of kidness in me. This has been amazing. The time just flew by. Again, 2 guests for the price of 1. And there's so many more things that I want to ask and Miranda wants to ask, but we're not panicking because you've already mentioned there's going to be a second one, so we can bring you both back. So that's
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful news. Thanks for being on our show. Miranda's going to throw links in the podcast description where we can find you. Julia, is Instagram the best way for people to track you down, to see your art, and possibly even hire you?
Yeah, Instagram is the place in the internet when I've been most active. So yeah.
Perfect. We'll add all those links for Julia and for Bruce in the podcast description below, so you're able to easily find them, hire Julia for all of your illustration needs, and dive into all of Bruce's creations, because he got me hooked the first time we met, and definitely hasn't been a disappointment yet. We do thank you both for joining us, and we had, like Jenna said, the time flew by. We're so appreciative.
It did. It was fun. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for
Thank
being
you.
Thanks for being on our show. Just before we sign off, we need to give a big shout out to Creative Edge Publicity and the Writers Corner Network, and of course, all our viewers and all our listeners who make this show possible. So thanks for tuning in. Bye.
Bye.